to a multitude of counselors. We're so glad you came to our program today. We're going to be talking about mental health issues, which is what we do on this program, and we talk about solutions and how God can help us to become healthier. I've got my illustrious treatment team here today. I've got Paul Coneff. He's from Texas. He's a marriage and family therapist by training, but he also has a prayer and discipleship ministry called Straight to the Heart, and through that ministry he ministers to people that are struggling with loss, trauma, addictions, and he points them to the cross in the most really beautiful and redemptive way. We've also got Shelley Wiggins from Michigan, and she runs a private practice called Driftwood Counseling, and she's very, very broad in what she does through that practice, but she likes to do things, to focus on things like addictions, anxiety, and recovery from abuse. And she uses not only talk therapy, traditional talk therapy, but also equine therapy, working with horses, and we're going to be talking about that during the show. We've also got Nivischi Edwards. Dr. Nivischi is a virtual private practice counselor. She teaches at Southern Adventist University. She's an aspiring author, and she likes to focus on developing good relationships, even a good relationship with yourself, because after all, we have a relationship with ourselves. So she's a relationship expert. We also have my co-host, Rob Davison. He works with me as a private practice counselor through Abide Network. He's from the DC area, and one of the things that's really close to my heart that Rob likes to specialize in is he helps men build biblical manhood, integrity, and learn how to be servant leaders, and I'm so thankful for that. Today we're going to be talking about eating disorders. Eating disorders, by definition, are not surprisingly disorders that have to do with eating. But there are three main eating disorders in the diagnostic manual, and I'm just going to give you those briefly and with a brief description of what they look like. First of all, there's anorexia. Anorexia is characterized by underweight. A person has to be, I believe it is 15% underweight to qualify to be anorexic. They must be unduly focused on food and diet and figure and weight, and their self-esteem in particular is unduly tied to those things. Bulimia is the same in that regard. The self-worth is unduly tied to weight. However, people with bulimia are not underweight. They're typically normal weight or a little higher sometimes, and they engage in binging and purging. Binge eating disorder is basically the binging without the purging, and binge eating disorder is not surprisingly the most common of the eating disorders. The prevalence of eating disorders is a very interesting question. From my study, most eating disorders are found in wealthy countries. It's kind of a rich man's disease. It tends to be that in the places in the world where people ever have a scarcity of food, they don't mess with food. You know, they I think have a sense that it's sacred somehow. And it's interesting because women are, of course, much more inclined toward eating disorders. Here's a little illustration of that, a little graph. So what's the prognosis? Well, all eating disorders are treatable, and they do respond to treatment. But I want to insert a caveat here, and that is that when an individual has what we call an ego-syntonic disorder, that means a disorder that is in sync with the ego, it feels good to them, as opposed to an ego-dystonic disorder, which they don't like to have. This person actually enjoys having that disorder. And anorexia is just such a disorder. And people with anorexia tend to like to be underweight, even though they don't consider themselves underweight because they have a distorted body image. And so it can be difficult to treat someone who doesn't dislike their illness. So it can be very challenging, but I want to give a praise report here. I'm a recovered person with anorexia. I had anorexia when I was 19. My mother sent me to a couple of different counselors. One of them told me I scared him. It was really interesting. But anyway, I got past it, and God healed me. So even though for that period of time I really clung to my disorder, ultimately I was freed, and thank God for that. So the treatments include, of course, counseling, particularly group therapy, psychoeducation. Sometimes medication can take the edge off the urge to binge. And of course, lifestyle can improve brain chemistry as well. and equine therapy. So let's talk about equine therapy, Shelley.
Well, where I found out about equine therapy is from doing some extra training at Remuda Ranch in Arizona. Actually, they're located in Wickenburg. And they did 20 years of data research with the treatment that they were doing for adolescents and women in their mid-20s. They found that a team approach that included family therapy, a faith portion of their treatment plan, and the use of equine therapy was what got them the greatest outcomes.
So can you define equine therapy for us?
Yes, it's equine-assisted growth and learning.
What's an equine?
An equine is equus, which means horse. So working with horses and people together. I guess the easiest and quickest way to explain it is a horse never lies. It functions like a mirror to a person's emotions. And every time we do these sessions, you would think that we've handed a script to the horse on how to respond to a certain client or patient's disorder. It is phenomenal how awesome God in his creation and how he's created this particular animal to serve us if we will spend the time.
So you talked about Remuda Ranch, and by the way, I've heard they have the best treatment, cutting edge, but you do equine therapy yourself, right?
The model that I'm certified in is called EGALA, which means Equine Assisted Growth and Learning. So it doesn't always have to be just psychotherapy. Some people come and do like a retreat, a leadership, team building, you know, like the old ropes course. They can do different activities with horses. I have done an eating disorder group where the entire group is there working with the horses. It's just really a phenomenal modality. I've worked with a patient who was struggling with anorexia, and she was pretty much nonverbal for the first 4 months.
Wow.
And I thought, you know,
What do you mean nonverbal? She wouldn't
meaning
talk?
we would sit for 45 minutes. I'd ask a few questions now and then, embrace that beauty of silence. As we know as counselors, sometimes that time happens and we don't always have to talk and fill the air, but she was literally silent. And I thought, you know, I can't keep taking her money. We're just sitting here, and I'm thinking, what am I doing to help her?
Wow.
And it was one of those amazing moments of, she said, you know, thank you for being patient.
Wow.
And just being with me.
And here you were feeling guilty.
I was thinking I have to produce something or, you know, do
Something's gotta
something.
happen. Yeah.
Right, and we did just a few sessions of equine therapy, and I'll never forget, she was just brushing the horse, and then all of a sudden, she just started to sob.
Oh, that's amazing. So
It is a
free her
very powerful modality. It's nothing like new agey, woo-woo, that kind of stuff. A lot of people ask me, you know, as a Christian, what are you doing dabbling in this? The way I look at it is,
what's airy-fairy about a horse?
well, nothing. That's why I'm bringing it up.
The Bible talks about horses.
Yeah. I think the most phenomenal part of it, like I said, is a horse can't lie. They meet you right where you're at, and they sense what's going on. If you need space, they stay away.
Yeah.
If you have too much going on, I'll share one more quick story. There was a girl who had not talked about the traumatic death of her father in over 5 years. And we had done in the office cognitive behavioral therapy. And she was just, you know, being lighthearted and just giggly about a whole bunch of things going on in high school.
Yeah.
And we weren't ever getting to it. So we go out to the ranch, one session only, and the horse could not stand to be in her presence, and it busted through the fence.
Because she was being so fake?
No, what we
was it?
kind of concluded was that she wasn't ready, and that horse picked up on the fact that I'm not ready, I'm out of here. And that was kind of what she was doing in therapy, is avoiding.
And then the horse avoided her.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It was really quite phenomenal.
Yeah, I used to ride horses as a child, and I was always told, they'll know if you're afraid. They'll know what you're feeling in that moment. So they're highly sensitive animals, is what you're saying, that are reflectors, become reflectors of the client and help the client kind of see their own emotions projected onto a screen, so to speak.
If people want to know more about this particular modality, they can go to egala.org. It's G-A-L-A, egala.org, and it tells you a whole lot more about it.
Yeah, I understand that they're working with equine therapy with young people with addictions too, isn't that the case? So it's a very broad application for that therapy. And you know, didn't God give us animals for a purpose? I mean, if you think about it, He could have created us in His image there in the Garden of Eden with just trees and flowers and fruit and all kinds of nice stuff and no animals. But what did He do? He created us in the midst of this whole, all these other species. And what did He do that for? For our enjoyment, and in a fallen world, for our healing.
You know, another metaphor that we use when people are ready to include the faith process is just the concept that a horse is a prey animal. Okay, they're worried about somebody
preying upon them.
Yes. So even though they're large and majestic creatures, when a client gets to realize that they're not a threat, that they can be a modality of change and progress.
When the client realizes that the horse himself
can carry their burden.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Okay, a horse is built to carry.
I see, but what, can you connect that to the fact that the horse is a prey animal, as you said? Do they feel for the horse because the horse has fears and threats of its own?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that was what I was wondering,
A lot of times people are afraid of the horse, but the horse is just afraid of us. And it's about that rapport building. We talk a lot about as counselors that if you don't have rapport and that connection, therapy doesn't work. Well, it's the same thing when they're out working with the horse. If they don't give that opportunity to reach out and connect. But it's more tactile. You know, they can just be brushing, and there's not a lot of verbal that a client has to engage in. And there's a lot of processing going on underneath.
That's powerful.
So the reason why this modality works well for eating disorders is what specifically?
Well, you can't hide from it. I think the way relationships play out, for example, an anorexic type behavior is going to be more like pushing away. Okay, with bulimia, we see more of, you know, I'm going to pull in a relationship fast, but then I'm going to push it away afterwards. You know, and so we look at their relationship and how they're reacting to the horse and with the horse, and we get them to kind of apply that to themselves.
Do you think that eating disorders are necessarily the result of suppressing emotion? You think there's a lot of that in the development of an eating disorder? I know for me that was the case. I didn't know how to process all my many emotions, and really anorexia for me was a program where I could shrink myself down and my life down to one simple thing. I only had one goal. I didn't have to face all the issues, relationships, life purpose, you know, being content with who I am, content with my body. I didn't have to deal with any of that. All I had to do was lose weight. My goal, my life was boiled down to one simple thing.
It was one thing you could control.
So it was a way, exactly, it was a control issue, and it was a way of blocking off my emotions and what I was facing as a young adult, trying to figure out where I belong in this world, you know, which was a huge question. I really think that that age range from like 17 to like 24 is a very vulnerable. Would you agree with that, Nivischi?
Absolutely. The clients that I've seen who struggled with eating disorder, the females in particular, it's been, I am struggling with relationships in other areas of my life. I don't know how to sort them through, but I can manage this relationship here with the food.
Yes, exactly. It's a way of simplifying life. To where you don't have to deal with all this stuff. And so, you know, connecting with an animal would perhaps give you a sense of release to where you could start to process those difficult emotions.
Sometimes we'll give a client a piece of chalk and they'll write their emotions or their burdens, the things that they need to leave with the horse, and then they'll watch the horse go back out to pasture.
Oh, that's powerful.
Another really interesting difference between anorexia and bulimia is anorexia tends to be more towards wanting to control emotions, and bulimia leans more towards body image, not accepting of how God has created you. So
it's really crazy and toxic how in Western culture, the things that are coming through the media at women are two basic things: be thin and food. You know, we're constantly bombarded with images of food and drawn into like sensual longing as a result of, if you watch television, the commercials are all about food, sex, and violence. Or the programming really is, because it's all lower brain stuff, because there's so much competition for watchers and viewers that they have to get those lower brain messages in at closer and closer intervals, so that and because the lower brain engages more quickly than the higher brain. So we're seeing more and more of that kind of thing. So we have constant bombardment with food images and with women needing to be, you know, thin or having just the perfect figure. Do you work with eating disorders with your program that you have, Paul?
Yeah, we had one girl that had her parents were involved, and I think it was partly about control, but she'd been teased, and so her solution was being teased. She interpreted it as being fat. It wasn't abuse, but they just had a nickname for her, Kelly Belly, and so she interpreted it as I'm fat. That belief system said, now I'm going to make sure I'm not fat. I'm rejected. My parents aren't in the picture. I'm going to make sure. So she ended up being anorexic, and so to the point where she was sick at the sight of food. She lived with a grandmother. She didn't have money for you know, to send her to an expensive treatment program. So we were able to pray with her, address some of those negative thoughts. She was able to get some healing, do some forgiving, and she was able to get some freedom.
That's powerful.
I love the horse ministry. It's
really cool.
A very powerful holistic component to add to.
Yeah. Well, let's look at our presenting problem here. Go ahead, Robin. Why don't you read that?
Alrighty. 22-year-old, single, and Asian American Blanche comes to the session swimming in a long dress, thick sweater, and boots. Her wealthy mother and father have insisted on her attending counseling and are paying for the sessions. Blanche is friendly and engaging, willing to banter about various topics, particularly religion. She's a recent convert to the Seventh-day Adventist Church and loves to talk about spiritual things. Because Blanche's mother has indicated that Blanche is under-eating and weighs only 95 pounds at 5'6", you broach the topic. Blanche cheerfully says she eats huge piles of food at every meal. You ask her if she thinks she's underweight, and she says no, that she's healthy. How do you help Blanche?
We have to go with a treatment team approach. It's not just one counselor. When we're dealing with eating disorders, especially when we get into those dangerous zones where, like with bulimia, the electrolytes are all thrown off or potassium is off, you can't look at a person and see that those things are happening. Anorexia, the brain shrinks, so depression is prevalent.
That's right.
So we really need a team. We need an MD, we need a registered dietitian, family therapy, psychiatry sometimes, and then the individual therapy. So it can become very expensive, very fast.
Yes, yes.
But if you're going to be the individual counselor, you need to draw in these other people as a part of the wheel.
And it's worth it given the fact that 10% of people with anorexia end up dying. It's the most
It's outstanding.
often
Highest
fatal
mortality rate.
psychiatric disorder. So it's worth, I mean, what would you have wanted to have spent if the person does pass away? So how tragic is that?
Right.
I have a question. If a client comes to us and we detect that something like this is going on, what would be how do we get them involved in the team treatment mode that you're talking about? Is this something that's inpatient, outpatient?
Number one, I have them go to their primary care and get a baseline physical. Start somewhere.
Sure.
You know, electrolytes, potassium, there's, you know, and to have an idea of a doctor in your area that has some extra training in this. Not every primary care is gonna, you know, have the bells and whistles attached to treat this.
Right.
But a registered dietitian for the accountability in regards to the food, because when you're doing the therapy, you can't really be the case manager. But in one side of it, you kind of have to. But if you're wanting to do just the therapy, get a family session in. There's dynamics that started at the table around the issue of food, or like you mentioned, that girl got a pet name somehow, and then that snowboarded from there.
Do you think recognizing the impact that the disorder is having on your family and seeing how deeply they care in kind of almost an intervention kind of context, or bringing them into counseling is helpful?
Well, that was another interesting part of the research that was done at Remuda Ranch. They did what was called Family Week, and so they would have like a circle of families around a family watching the therapy take place for a truth and love session. So there's a place for truth and love. How is this impacting us as a family?
Wow.
You know, just like you would at an addiction intervention. You know.
So the families would all watch the one family that was having the therapy, and they'd see them working through some of the things that probably laid the foundation for the eating disorder to begin with. Now that sounds like a lot of accountability on a family. I would be intimidated that people would, you know, say I was neurotic and codependent.
Yeah, but they've done, you know, the 20 years worth of the research and have the highest recovery.
I'm just curious, as with someone like Blanche, who seems to be 95 pounds, 5'6", and says, I eat lots.
What's she eating?
So and she says
I've got no problem.
She's healthy too.
How do you help someone like that to see that there is a problem?
And that's where psychoeducation, you talked about, Jennifer, that psychoeducation is a part of the treatment process also.
Yes.
And educating them, and it's a slow process. If I think that everything is normal, then it's hard for me to see anything other than
and if
what
they
it
get
is.
that physical exam and then they see everything's off and there's a serious problem, do they tend to accept that, or do they rationalize it away?
It depends. Yeah, it depends on the client. But that's a part of our goal. It's to help them accept what is real versus what they've told themselves is true.
Let me share from my own experience, because I don't know if you figured this out, but Blanche was me. I was 5'6", 95 pounds, and I was, believe it or not, dating my husband at this time. And my mother was very worried about me. She would pressure me, so her psychoeducation was ineffective. It was just really all about how worried she was. My husband, on the other hand, took a more gracious approach, because he'd been through anorexia himself before he became a Christian. He got involved in Eastern religions that emphasized very rigid diet approaches, and he ended up starving down to like 120 pounds, and he's like big frame, 5'8" or something. So he went through it, and he had this like caring approach to me, and so he would drop things. He would say things like, I had in the middle of me you know, struggling with this thing, I had a sore appear on my leg out of nowhere, a black sore with bumps. It was disgusting. And I mentioned it to him, and he said, oh, that's because you're not well nourished and your body can't fight it off. But he didn't like, see, you know, he was very gentle and but very matter of fact about it. And that kind of thing did get through to me. And what finally happened, if you want to hear the rest of the story, is we did get married, and we moved to Montana, and he was a tree planter. And I had to wash my clothes in the creek. I had to cook over a fire. I had to carry trees up to him on the mountains in these backpacks. And I started to realize, hey, I like the idea of being strong. I'm over this being all skinny and frail. I like being strong. And I busted out of it. It was a miracle. But I think it was, a lot of it was feeling the security of that relationship.
That love and support.
Loved. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that's my story. I don't know if you guys figured out that I was Blanche, but I was. I'm not Asian though. But go ahead, as you can see. But go ahead and give us a quick recap here, Rob.
Okay, so we started talking about equine therapy and how Remuda Ranch is not where you work. Is that correct?
Correct. I just went and did some extra training there.
Yes. But that is one place where an individual could get excellent treatment. So equine therapy is all about a team approach, bringing the family in, bringing faith into the picture, and centered around horses, because horses, as you say, cannot lie. They are very in tune with what's going on with an individual, and I could actually have a testimony about that. When I was younger and I tried to ride a horse myself, and I was afraid, so the horse just nudged me up against the fence and stepped on my foot and said, you're afraid, I'm going to put you in your place. But
no.
So I know horses are amazing creatures. You also mentioned egala.org. And this is where an individual can go to get information. And let's see, you also mentioned that horses, the therapy there is very tactile. which is much different than counseling in a session. And the horse actually can act like the counselor because this is a safe place for the individual to just sit with and be accepted. And this is what is very important in counseling, is to be accepted. With anorexia, there's a control issue that we've talked about, control over the emotions, because in life there's so much that's out of control, and this is one area where an individual can have some control. And they can manage their life stressors through this one modality, which is food. Bulimia, on the other hand, is about focusing on body image, because body image is, it's just so prevalent in terms of what a body should look like. And we emphasize the treatment approach must be holistic. We're talking about bringing the medical doctor into the picture, a registered dietitian, family therapy, individual therapy, and was there another? Group therapy. Yes. What we can do as individual counselors is the psychoeducational piece is very important, and it's a slow process because individuals are not always, there's that aspect of denial. And so as we can continue to bring psychoeducation into the picture, we can be probably piggybacking on what our parents have been telling us all along, but maybe they'll be open to what we have to say now as the professional.
Excellent. So the Lord tells us, I want you to prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers. And that's why we need to deal with our emotional issues, because we can't truly prosper and be healthy just eating the right food and getting enough exercise. We've got to deal with our emotional issues, and eating disorders are a good example of what happens when we don't adequately and correctly process our emotions. So God has promised us that He will give us, He will strengthen us and lead us with His right hand. And He has also told us that perfect love casts out all fear.
Amen.
And so God is by our side, willing and wanting to help us through these difficult passages. If you know someone with an eating disorder, if you yourself are struggling with an eating disorder, seek help first and foremost from God, but don't hesitate to get professional help as well, or group help, because it can help. Thank you for joining us on A Multitude of Counselors. We do hope you will join us for future programs. And until then, I want you to remember the love of God, that He is a healer, and He says that we should cast all our cares on Him because He cares for us. That's 1 Peter 5:7. May God bless you.